Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping into one of the most fundamental shifts in decades, the complete overhaul of India's labor laws.
It really is a massive change.
Yeah.
For nearly 70 years, the whole framework was this fragmented mosaic of 29 different central laws.
And many of them were ancient, right? We're talking about laws from the pre-independence era, the 40s, the 50s.
Exactly. And that system was, well, it was complex, often contradictory, and just not built for modern employment, whether you're talking about a huge factory or the gig economy.
So the government of India basically took all that legal clutter and, in this huge consolidation effort, boiled it all down.
Down to 4 key codes, and they're all now effective as of November 24, 2025.
And this isn't just some, bureaucratic spring cleaning. This is being positioned as the foundation for a future-ready workforce, all aimed at boosting Atmanirbhar Bharat, a self-reliant India.
Right, and we should probably name those 4 codes, since they're the new pillars of everything.
Absolutely. First up is the Code on Wages, 2019,
Then you have the Industrial Relations Code, 2020.
followed by the Code on Social Security, 2020.
And finally, the Occupational Safety, Health, and Working Conditions Code, or OSHWC Code, also from 2020.
So our mission today is to cut through all the legalese and pull out the surprising things in these documents that are going to impact your job security, your monthly cash flow, and, critically, your long-term savings.
And we should probably start with the biggest, most explosive change of all.
The money. Let's start with how your benefits get calculated.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's talk about the money games that used to happen in corporate India. For decades, employers had a pretty clever way of structuring compensation, your CTC.
They did. The whole game was to minimize their long-term liability for things like Provident Fund or PF and gratuity.
How do they do that?
Well, those benefits were calculated on a really small slice of your salary, basically just your basic pay and dearness allowance.
So the strategy was to keep those two things as low as possible.
As low as you could. And then you'd load up the rest of the CTC with all these other allowances, house rent allowance, conveyance, special allowance, you name it.
Which, as an employee, you might have liked in the short term. Your monthly take-home salary looked pretty good.
It did. But what you didn't always realize is that your paper wealth, your CTC, wasn't turning into real retirement security. Your PF was being calculated on a tiny fraction of your actual pay.
It was a trade-off a lot of people didn't really grasp until it was time to leave the company.
It was a systemic issue, and the new Code on Wages has slammed that loophole shut.
Okay, so how does it do that? What's the mechanism they've put in place?
It's all about a new uniform definition of wages. And the core of it is what everyone is calling the 50% rule.
The 50% rule. Tell us about that.
So the new definition of wages includes your basic pay, your DA, and something called a retaining allowance. But here's the kicker. All those other allowances, the HRA, conveyance, all the extras, they cannot, by law, be more than 50% of your total remuneration, your gross salary.
Okay, so what if they are? What if a company's allowance bucket is, say, 60% of the gross?
Then that excess 10% isn't just ignored. It has to be added back into the basic wage for the purpose of calculating benefits.
So it forces the calculation base up?
It structurally forces it up. It means companies now have to calculate your PF, your gratuity, your maternity benefits on a much, much higher base than before.
And we saw some data on this. The impact is huge.
Oh, it's massive. Our sources show about half of all companies had a basic to gross ratio, somewhere between 36 and 49%.
So right in that zone that's now being targeted.
Exactly. For those companies, just enforcing this rule could increase their liability, the deemed wages for benefits, by as much as 40%.
And for you, the employee, that means a much bigger lump sum payout when you retire or leave.
A significantly bigger payout. But, and this is a big but, there's a trade-off.
But of course there is. Employers don't just absorb these costs, do they?
They don't. The employer's contribution to your PF goes up. Their gratuity liability goes up. So to keep your total CTC the same, they'll likely have to restructure those other allowances.
Which means
your monthly take-home salary might actually go down a bit because more of your money is being funneled directly into your long-term savings.
That makes perfect sense. And it leads us right into the next big topic, which is gratuity itself. I heard this rumor that the 5-year service rule was just gone for everyone. We need to clear that up.
Yes, that's a common misconception. Let's be really clear about it. For a regular, permanent employee, the rule is still basically the same.
It's 5 continuous years of service.
5 continuous years to qualify for gratuity, unless there are exceptions like death or disability. For your typical permanent staffer, nothing's changed there.
But the rumor started for a reason. Because for a huge part of the workforce, that 5-year cliff has just disappeared.
That's right. And this is where we see the really revolutionary shift. It applies to fixed-term employees, or FTEs.
And what's the new rule for them?
Under the new Social Security Code, an FTE is eligible for gratuity after completing just 1 year of continuous service.
1 year. That's a staggering change.
It is. Think about industries that live on short-term contracts. Construction, IT projects, seasonal manufacturing.
Right, where contracts rarely made it to 5 years.
And so millions of workers were just systematically denied this benefit. Now they get it. And the protection doesn't stop there.
How so?
The codes mandate full parity. An FTE must get all the same benefits as a permanent worker: equal wages, leave, medical, everything. The signal is clear. Hire people on formal, fixed-term contracts. Don't use complex loopholes.
And this all ties into a bigger theme of just formalizing everything, right? Dragging every employment contract into the light.
Transparency is now non-negotiable. Written appointment letters are now mandatory for all workers.
So not just for white-collar jobs and big corporations.
For everyone. This gives the worker clarity, it gives them job security, and crucially, it creates an official employment history.
Which is the key to accessing all those other benefits we're about to talk about.
Exactly. It's the gateway.
Okay, so let's move on to that expanding safety net. The gig economy has been this massive gray area for labor law everywhere. How do the new codes in India tackle it?
They tackle it head-on by, for the first time, legally defining things like gig work, platform work, and the aggregators.
So the big taxi apps, the food delivery platforms?
Yes, and that formal recognition is the first crucial step, because now the state can apply specific Social Security rules to them.
And the funding for that safety net now falls partly on the aggregators themselves.
It does. They're now required to contribute between 1% and 2% of their annual turnover into a Social Security fund for these workers.
Is there a cap on that?
There is. The contribution can't be more than 5% of the total amount that's paid out to the workers. So it's meaningful, but it's designed not to crush high-volume, low-margin platforms.
And in a country with so much internal migration, how do you make sure that benefit travels with the worker?
Everything is designed to be fully portable. The benefits are linked to your Aadhaar card through a universal account number, a UAN.
So a delivery driver can move from Mumbai to Chennai, and their benefits just move with them.
Seamlessly.
Let's pivot to the push for inclusivity for women. The changes here seem pretty sweeping.
They really are. At a fundamental level, gender discrimination is now legally prohibited across the board in recruitment, in pay, in working conditions, equal pay for equal work.
But the change that really jumped out at me was around night shifts and traditionally hazardous jobs.
That's a huge cultural and regulatory landmark. Women are now allowed to work night shifts and in all kinds of work, even in places like underground mines or operating heavy machinery.
Which were previously restricted.
Largely, yes. But, and this is critical, it comes with very strict safeguards.
What kind of safeguards?
First, it requires the woman's explicit consent. The employer can't force it. And second, the employer must provide mandatory safety measures: secure transport, on-site security, CCTV monitoring.
I also saw a note about the definition of family being expanded for female employees.
Yes. For Social Security coverage, the definition of family now includes dependent parents-in-law, which just recognizes the reality of modern family structures in India.
And quickly on health. Under the OSHWC code, what's new there?
There's a big focus on preventive care. It's now mandatory for employers to provide free annual health checkups for all workers over the age of 40.
And for workers in hazardous jobs?
For them, it's mandatory for everyone, regardless of age. It's a big step towards early detection.
And what about working hours? There was some chatter about 12-hour days becoming the norm.
The code allows for flexibility, so a daily shift can be anywhere from 8 to 12 hours. But, and this is the key, the weekly limit is still strictly set at 48 hours.
So if you work a 12-hour day, you can only work 4 days a week.
Exactly. You get a 3-day weekend. And anything over your prescribed hours requires your consent and must be paid as overtime at double the normal rate.
Okay, let's switch gears to the business side of things. A big part of the sales pitch for these codes was ease of doing business. How is compliance actually simpler now?
The administrative load is definitely lighter. Instead of juggling 29 different laws, each with its own filings and registrations.
A nightmare for a small business.
A total nightmare. Now it's a single registration, a single license, and a single return that covers everything.
And what about enforcement?
They've introduced this new role, the inspector cum facilitator. The idea is to shift the focus away from just being punitive and more towards guiding and helping businesses to actually comply.
That sounds like a clear positive for businesses. But when we get to the Industrial Relations Code, we hit the most controversial part of this entire overhaul.
Yes, the layoff threshold. This is really where the codes become a double-edged sword.
So what was the old rule?
Historically, if you had 100 or more workers, you needed prior permission from the government to conduct layoffs, retrenchment, or to close down.
And the new rule?
The new IR code raises that threshold significantly, from 100 workers all the way up to 300 workers.
Wow, so any company with up to 299 employees can now downsize without needing a green light from the government first.
That's right. It gives huge operational flexibility to a massive chunk of the Indian corporate sector.
And what's the concern that specialists are raising here?
Well, the critics point out the contradiction. On one hand, the government is making it more expensive to keep an employee because of higher PF and gratuity costs.
Right.
But on the other hand, they're making it much easier for a lot of those same companies to let people go.
So the fear is that when the economy slows down, we might see more downsizing from these mid-sized firms.
That's the worry. The combination of higher costs and easier retrenchment could make downsizing a more frequent tool, even if the workers who are let go get a much better severance package.
It seems like the focus is shifting from protecting the job itself to protecting the financial package on your way out.
Precisely. It's a very modern, almost neoliberal approach to labor markets.
So if we were to summarize the biggest takeaways for someone listening to this deep dive, what should they be focusing on?
I'd say three things. First, the money. That mandatory 50% wage base means your retirement savings, your PF, your gratuity are being built on a much stronger foundation.
Okay.
Second, if you work on contracts, you now have real security. You get gratuity after just 1 year. That's a game changer. And third, the formal inclusion of gig workers. That's a sign that the safety net has to keep expanding.
So if we connect those two big threads, the increased cost of an employee from the wage code and the increased ease of retrenchment from the IR code, what does that tell us about the government's overall philosophy here?
It raises a really interesting question. I think it signals a major shift away from a protectionist mindset that tried to protect your specific job.
The job you have right now.
Yes. Instead, the focus is now squarely on protecting the workers' financial security and their employability as they move between jobs. The state is essentially saying your employment might be dynamic, but your financial safety net when you exit has to be robust.
It really reframes the whole conversation from job preservation to worker resilience.
It absolutely does.
And as we wrap this deep dive, here's something to think about. This massive effort creates a new, high national standard for labor protection. But labor is on India's concurrent list, which means everything relies on over 30 states and territories to actually adopt and issue the corresponding rules.
A huge implementation challenge.
It is. So given the incredible expansion of Social Security coverage, from just 19% of the workforce in 2015 to over 64% now, how effectively can this national standard really be implemented when it depends so heavily on state-level speed? What happens to the protection for workers in the states that inevitably lag behind? And what does that mean for companies trying to operate on a national scale? Something to mull over as these changes roll out across the country.